There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when you feel something shift. The way they look at you changes, the warmth in their voice fades, the connection, once so alive, becomes mechanical, empty, brittle. And you begin to wonder, is this what love feels like? Because if this is love, why does it feel so cold? If they love you, why does it hurt? Love, when it is genuine, seeks expression. It does not live in secrecy, nor can it be truly masked. Like a hidden current beneath still waters, the presence or absence of love ripples outward. The human psyche, sensitive by nature, picks up on what the conscious mind tries to deny. We feel it in the small dissonances, a shift in tone, a pause too long, a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. These are not accidents, they are symptoms. They are the unconscious speaking through the body. People rarely say outright that they have stopped loving you. Words are tidy, deliberate, but the body does not lie. The psyche, unable to sustain contradiction, begins to reveal the truth through involuntary channels. The way they delay their responses, the way their eyes drift past you, the way your joy no longer stirs excitement in them. Even their silence becomes charged, pregnant not with depth, but with detachment. These are betrayals not of action, but of essence. You ask yourself, did I imagine it? Am I overthinking? But the body knows. The heart registers the withdrawal long before the intellect catches up. The betrayal of love is rarely a single event. It is slow, like a sunset you didn't realize was happening until the sky had gone dark. One day, you find yourself alone in a room full of conversation, present but not received. You remember the days when your laughter brought them to life. Now it merely echoes back to you, unreturned, unnoticed. That is the unconscious at work, delivering its message with devastating precision. This betrayal is not always malicious. Sometimes the one who no longer loves you doesn't know it yet. They act from habits. They mimic care, but what they cannot fake is presence. Real presence is not just physical. It is emotional, energetic, intuitive. When love fades, presence fades with it. The connection begins to starve. And still they may say the words, I'm here, I love you, but something inside you whispers, no, not anymore. There is an ancient ache that comes when love disappears, but pretends to stay. A dissonance between word and action, between face and energy. This is where the unconscious betrays the mask. The relationship continues in form, but not in soul. What remains is a shell, a performance rehearsed so many times that even the performers forget that the stage has collapsed. You begin to question your value, thinking perhaps it is you who changed, you who failed to remain lovable. But the deeper truth is simpler and more painful. They stopped loving you, and it is showing in every unguarded moment. Every unconscious gesture now carries a weight. The hesitation in their touch, the forgetfulness around your needs, the subtle contempt in their tone. These are not flaws. They are revelations. The psyche does not tolerate lies for long. When the heart is denied what it knows, it starts to fracture. You wake up exhausted, anxious, disconnected, not because you are weak, but because the truth is living just beneath the surface, demanding to be seen. And in this tension, between what is said and what is felt, you begin to unravel. You are no longer living in love. You are surviving in the absence of it. This betrayal does not always come with cruelty. Sometimes it comes dressed in routine, in politeness, in familiarity. But love without presence is abandonment in disguise. And the unconscious keeps leaving clues, in their absence from your joy, in their silence during your sorrow, in the way your growth no longer inspires them, but threatens their comfort. And so you begin to sense the truth, that the love you once felt is no longer mutual, that the bond you carry alone has become a burden, that you are clinging not to a person, but to a memory, and the psyche, tired of the performance, starts asking deeper questions. Neglect does not announce itself with the loud clamor of rejection or the harshness of a door slammed in your face. It enters quietly, almost unnoticed, like the slow fading of light at dusk. It does not yell. It does not throw punches. It simply withdraws, and in that withdrawal, it leaves a haunting echo that reverberates long after the physical presence is gone. Neglect is the shadow cast by indifference. It grows in the spaces where love should be, between the words they no longer say, in the moments they no longer care to share. It lives in the silences. It thrives in the absence of attention, like a plant in the dark, growing unbidden in the corners of your heart. It is not always visible at first. At first, you see it only in glimpses. A forgotten birthday, a text unanswered, an invitation left unopened. It seems small, but like all shadows, it begins to stretch, becoming longer, darker, more difficult to ignore. You try to convince yourself that it is just a phase, that they are busy, distracted, or overwhelmed. You wait, you hope, you make excuses. You bend yourself into shapes to accommodate the neglect, all the while believing that with enough time, things will change. But what you are missing, what the psyche knows instinctively, is this. Neglect is not a misunderstanding. It is the manifestation of something deeper, a refusal to acknowledge the person you are. You are not the problem. The problem is their inability, or their unwillingness, to truly see you. And in this failure to see, they project their own shadows onto you. They fail to love because they do not want to confront what loving you would demand of them: vulnerability, presence, acceptance. These things are not easy to give. These things require the courage to face one's own limitations, to be open to discomfort, and to embrace the messiness of real connection. But they don't want to be uncomfortable. They would rather turn away than confront the depth of your need, and so they neglect. The shadow of neglect is cold. It creeps into the spaces where once there was warmth, and it slowly replaces your radiance with something else: emptiness. But unlike the darkness of abandonment, neglect is insidious. It hides beneath the surface, dressed in politeness, in routine. You are not abandoned outright. You are simply ignored. You are not left, but left out. And this is what makes the wound of neglect so difficult to heal. It is so subtle that, for a long time, you cannot name it. You can only feel it. When love is withheld in this way, when neglect becomes the standard by which the relationship is measured, something begins to erode inside you. You stop trusting yourself. You begin to question whether your needs are valid, whether your desires are too much, whether your emotions are a burden. You begin to twist yourself into what they want, what they can tolerate, and in doing so, you lose the very essence of who you are. The shadow of neglect demands this sacrifice. It asks you to shrink, to bend, to disappear in order to fit into the void left by someone else's absence. But there is more. Neglect is not just a symptom of emotional absence. It is a mirror. It reflects back to you the part of yourself that you are too afraid to face. When someone neglects you, they do not only reveal their own lack of love, they also reveal the way you have neglected your own needs. Perhaps you too have learned to ignore your desires, to push away your feelings, to settle for less than you deserve. Neglect in this way becomes a feedback loop. You neglect yourself in the same way that others neglect you. The wound is mirrored, the shadow grows. You start to think that this is all there is, that love, real love, is a fantasy, a luxury you can never afford. The shadow of neglect teaches you to question your worth. It makes you feel that you are not worthy of care, of attention, of love. And so you begin to settle. Settle for scraps, settle for the coldness, settle for the silence. The psyche's desperate plea to be seen, to be loved, is drowned out by the very neglect that seeks to destroy it. But the true harm of neglect is not just that it deprives you of love. It deprives you of your own self-respect. It chips away at your belief in your own value, piece by piece, until you can no longer recognize who you were before it all began. You begin to live in the shadow of someone else's disinterest, and that shadow becomes your own. You begin to live in the shadows without even realizing that there is light beyond them, beyond the neglect, beyond the silence, beyond the numbness. It is in these moments, in these long stretches of solitude where your presence is ignored, that the real work begins. The neglect is not a final verdict. It is an invitation to turn inward, to rediscover your own worth, to reclaim the love you have forsaken for the sake of someone else's comfort. It is a moment where the shadow forces you to confront the parts of yourself that have been neglected for too long. It beckons you to look inwards and ask, why have I tolerated this? This is where the true transformation begins, in the dark spaces, in the shadow of neglect. Here you are called to remember yourself. Here you are called to rise from the ashes of the relationship, from the neglect, from the silence, and reclaim the fullness of your own being. But first, you must understand, truly understand, that the neglect was never about you. It was about them. It was about their inability to love, their refusal to acknowledge your soul, their inability to meet you in the depths of your need. And as the shadow of neglect lingers, you will begin to feel the stirrings of something deeper, a longing, a remembering of who you are when you are free from the weight of their disregard. The archetype of the abandoned self is perhaps one of the most painful and powerful of the inner figures we carry within us. It is an image forged in neglect, in isolation, in the absence of love that was once promised but never fully delivered. This archetype does not speak in the loud, dramatic language of anger or frustration. It speaks in the quieter, more insidious language of quiet resignation, of hollow space, of yearning that has been suffocated by years of neglect. To be abandoned, in the deepest sense, is not merely to be left behind physically. It is to be forsaken at the level of your soul. The abandoned self is not simply the one who has been ignored or forgotten by others. It is the part of you that has been forgotten by yourself. It is the piece of you that you abandoned long ago because the world asked you to shrink, to become smaller, to hide your true nature, your needs, your desires. In the process, you abandoned your own authenticity, and in this abandonment, a shadow grew, one that you cannot easily escape, no matter how far you run. This archetype is not about what others have done to you. It is about the wound you carry because you allowed their neglect to define you. You internalized their inability to love you. You turned the unspoken rejection into a narrative about your own worth. You told yourself time and time again that you were not deserving of more, that your needs were too much, that your desires were burdensome. And this story, told silently within your own psyche, creates the abandoned self, a figure who stands at the edges of your consciousness, always waiting, always hoping, but never fully seen, never fully nurtured. The abandoned self is not simply a passive victim of circumstances. It is a part of you that has learned to survive in the absence of love. It is a quiet warrior worn by time who holds onto fragments of hope even in the face of repeated neglect. This part of you knows how to adapt, how to bend, how to pretend everything is fine when, deep down, there is a gnawing ache that cannot be soothed. This is the part of you that stays in relationships that no longer nourish you, that compromises your needs for the sake of someone else's comfort, that hides the pain behind a mask of indifference. The abandoned self does not scream. It whispers. It waits in the dark corners of your psyche, hoping that one day someone will notice. But the most insidious part of the abandoned self is its ability to remain hidden from you, even as it runs your life. You may not even realize you are living through the lens of this abandoned archetype because it has been with you for so long. You may have spent years trying to prove your worth to those who could never truly see you. You may have spent countless nights wondering why they could not love you as you are. But the real question is, why could you not love yourself as you are? The archetype of the abandoned self exists because we learn to carry the burden of abandonment, to make excuses for others' neglect, to blame ourselves for their inability to love us fully. We continue to pour ourselves into relationships, to give our energy, our time, our presence, even when it is clear that we are not receiving anything in return. The abandoned self convinces us that we are not worthy of more, that our love will always be too much for others to handle. We live under the spell of its quiet suggestion, and in doing so, we perpetuate the very neglect that caused its birth. But this archetype is not solely a wound, it is also a guide. The abandoned self has much to teach us about our own capacity for resilience, for transformation, and for growth. It is a reminder of what happens when we give ourselves away too freely, when we lose ourselves in the act of loving others while neglecting our own needs. It teaches us the painful lesson that love must begin within ourselves first. In some ways, the abandoned self is the price we pay for the illusions we cling to about love. We idealize what it should be, what it could be, and we project these ideals onto others, hoping they will fulfill the empty spaces within us. But love, in its truest form, does not require projection. It does not depend on what others give to us. It is not a transaction. Love is a sacred, internal process that requires us to first love ourselves, deeply, unconditionally, without apology. It is not until we can face the abandoned self, acknowledge it, and honor its pain that we begin to heal. Healing begins when we stop trying to fill the empty spaces with other people's love. It begins when we learn to nurture and love the abandoned self, to validate the needs that have been ignored, to speak to the parts of ourselves that we have long neglected. The abandoned self has been waiting for you to return, for you to see the pieces of yourself that you have cast aside, to embrace the parts that have been left in the dark. And in doing so, you reclaim your own sovereignty. The abandoned self also holds within it a deep wisdom, a wisdom that emerges only when we stop searching for love outside of ourselves. It is the wisdom of self-acceptance, of recognizing that we are whole, even in the midst of our wounds. It is the wisdom of standing strong in the face of neglect, of learning that we can survive, indeed, we can thrive, without needing validation from others. But this wisdom does not come without effort. It requires a confrontation with our deepest fears, our greatest insecurities, and our most tender wounds. The abandoned self will not simply disappear. It will not go away because we ignore it. It will not heal by pretending it doesn't exist. It can only heal when we look directly at it, when we hold space for it, and when we allow ourselves to feel the grief of its abandonment without shame or self-judgment. And in this space, we begin to realize something profound. The abandoned self is not something to be fixed. It is not something broken that needs to be repaired. It is a part of us that has been waiting for us to remember. It is a part of us that has always existed, waiting for us to acknowledge its truth, to hear its silent cry, and to hold it in the light of our own awareness. Indifference is perhaps one of the most lethal forces within human relationships. Yet it often remains unnoticed, slipping silently between interactions and carving deep grooves into the soul. Unlike hatred or anger, which burn bright with emotion and demand acknowledgement, indifference is quieter, more insidious. It is a language that does not speak directly, but communicates in the spaces between words, in the pauses, in the absence of attention and care. When someone is indifferent to you, they are not merely ignoring you, they are erasing you. It is not the loudness of rejection that cuts the deepest, but the absence of acknowledgement altogether. Indifference is the quiet withholding of presence. It is the refusal to engage, the decision to not see you, to not care. And yet, this is often far more painful than overt hostility, because it forces you into the position of questioning your own worth, your own existence. To be met with indifference is to be unseen in the most profound way. It is to feel as though you are not worth their attention, their energy, or their time. It is to feel as though you are floating through their life, passing through their presence without making a single impression, as if your soul is invisible. Indifference speaks volumes, but its language is one of emptiness, of nothingness. It is the shadow of neglect, a hollow silence that echoes louder than any words of cruelty could. Indifference, when practiced over time, has a way of wearing you down. It doesn't strike you with sharp blows, but it chips away at your sense of self, worth, your sense of significance. You begin to wonder, silently and without understanding, why they do not care, why they do not respond to you with warmth, with attention, with affection. You question what it is about you that makes you so easy to forget, so easy to ignore. The subtlety of indifference allows it to slide unnoticed into your consciousness, but its effects are far-reaching. It erodes your sense of identity and leaves you grasping at fleeting fragments of connection, always searching, always reaching, but never finding the solid ground of true emotional reciprocity. This is the tragedy of indifference. It is not only a refusal to engage, but a refusal to meet you in the full depth of your humanity. It is a kind of emotional distancing that denies the richness of who you are. When someone is indifferent to you, they are not just withholding affection, they are also withholding their capacity to witness your experience, to validate your emotions, and to affirm your presence in the world. They do not allow themselves to be touched by you, to truly see you for the person you are, and in doing so they betray not only you but themselves. But what is more troubling is that indifference often masquerades as something else. It is hidden behind the mask of politeness, of routine, of "I'm too busy" or "I don't have time." It is dressed up in the language of practicality, in the appearance of normality, but its effects are anything but ordinary. The one who is indifferent may appear to be present physically, but emotionally they are worlds away. The lack of emotional availability is not always obvious, but it is felt deeply. Their presence is hollow, their words are empty. There is something profoundly disturbing about being ignored, not just as a child, but as an adult. In childhood, we are more accustomed to the dynamics of neglect. We learn to cope with being invisible, with being unheard. But as adults, we begin to expect more. We expect recognition. We expect that those who are closest to us will be able to see and respond to our humanity. And when that does not happen, when we are met with indifference, the wound is more painful because it shatters the illusion that we are fully seen in the world. Indifference is also the language of self-protection. Those who withhold their attention and their care often do so not because they do not value us, but because they are afraid of what fully engaging with another person would require of them. To love, to truly love, demands vulnerability, the willingness to open oneself up to the risk of pain, rejection, and disappointment. And for many, it is far easier to retreat behind a wall of indifference than to face the possibility of emotional exposure. So they choose to keep their distance, to shut themselves off from the needs of others, even if it means shutting off the possibility of connection and growth. The person who speaks the language of indifference is often not aware of the weight of their words, or, in this case, the absence of words. They may not realize that their disinterest communicates more about them than they intend. Indifference is a defense mechanism, a shield against the complexities of human interaction, a way of protecting themselves from the vulnerability that comes with true connection. But while they think they are protecting themselves, they are also distancing themselves from the richness of life that comes with intimacy and emotional sharing. This is where the depth of the wound lies, in the lack of emotional reciprocity. Relationships, whether familial, romantic, or platonic, thrive on a delicate balance of give and take. When one person withdraws emotionally, when one person chooses to not engage, the relationship becomes unbalanced, unhealthy, and ultimately unsustainable. The other person, in their need to be seen, to be acknowledged, begins to unravel. They may attempt to fill the emptiness with other forms of validation, seeking attention from others, overcompensating in areas where they have been neglected. But these efforts are always in vain. They cannot fill the hole left by indifference. Only recognition, true recognition, can do that. Only love, given freely and without reservation, can heal the wound of invisibility. The language of indifference is also the language of withdrawal. It is not just about the absence of care, it is about the refusal to even acknowledge the possibility of connection. It is a silent retreat into one's own world, a retreat that leaves the other person on the outside looking in, forever yearning for something that is no longer offered. It is a conscious turning away, a rejection of the shared humanity that could have united two people. But indifference does not always look the same. Sometimes it appears in the form of small neglects, missing a call, forgetting a date, failing to show up when it matters. At other times, it may be more overt, more cutting. The cold silence in response to a plea for connection, the dismissal of your thoughts, the emotional walls that are so thick, they seem impenetrable. Yet in all its forms, indifference carries the same message. You do not matter enough for me to give you my attention. And in this message, it speaks louder than any words of rejection could. It is easy to overlook indifference when it first begins to appear. It does not scream for attention like anger or bitterness. It slips in unnoticed, almost imperceptible. But if left unchecked, if it is allowed to grow unchecked, it becomes a silent force that poisons the very foundation of the relationship. The one who is ignored begins to question their value, their place, their worth. They begin to believe the lie that they are not enough. They wonder why they were not chosen, why they were not seen, why they were not loved. The call to withdraw and individuate is a call to the deepest, most profound transformation. It is not a simple withdrawal in the sense of retreating from the world or abandoning others. It is the invitation to turn inward, to listen to the quiet voice that lies beneath the noise of the external world, and to begin the sacred work of discovering who you truly are. It is a call to step out of the roles and expectations that have been placed upon you by society, family, and even your own unconscious beliefs, and to stand alone in the vastness of your own being. This calling is not always easy to hear. It often comes at a time when you are caught in the throes of relationships, obligations, and distractions. It arrives in moments of deep dissatisfaction, in periods of existential crisis, in the quiet discontent that grows when you realize that the life you are living is not your own. It is the feeling of being adrift, lost in a sea of other people's desires, dreams, and expectations, with no clear sense of direction or purpose. The noise of the world grows louder, and the clarity of your own inner truth becomes fainter and fainter, until it feels as though you are fading into the background, your essence swallowed by the demands of life. To withdraw is to step back from this cacophony, to pull away from the external demands and pressures, and to create space for something deeper to emerge. This is not a withdrawal from the world itself, but a withdrawal from the distractions that keep you from knowing yourself. It is the moment you realize that the constant busyness, the social obligations, and the noise of external life have prevented you from truly hearing the whispers of your soul. It is the calling to silence the external world in order to hear the internal voice that has been waiting to speak, waiting to guide you back to yourself. Individuation, as a psychological process, is the journey of becoming whole by integrating the disparate parts of your psyche, the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the shadow, the known and the unknown. It is the process of discovering and accepting who you truly are, free from the projections of others and the roles you have played in the world. It is the process of reclaiming the parts of yourself that you have abandoned or repressed, and of weaving them into a cohesive, authentic whole. In many ways, individuation is a spiritual journey. It requires you to confront the aspects of yourself that you may have long avoided, the parts that have been hidden in the shadows. These are the fears, the wounds, the desires, and the truths that you have denied, dismissed, or repressed. To individuate, you must meet these aspects of yourself with courage and compassion. You must bring them into the light of your consciousness and allow them to be seen. And in doing so, you reclaim your own power and authenticity. The calling to withdraw is not a call to escape from life or to retreat into isolation. It is the invitation to withdraw from the superficialities and distractions that keep you from your own truth. It is a call to create space for introspection, to make room for reflection, and to honor the inner voice that is guiding you towards wholeness. It is a recognition that, in order to fully live, you must first come to terms with who you are beneath the layers of social conditioning, cultural expectations, and familial roles. There are moments in life when the external world becomes so overwhelming, so demanding, that the only way to survive is to step back and withdraw. This may come in the form of physical retreat, where you find yourself craving solitude, seeking a quiet space away from the noise of the world. It may come in the form of emotional withdrawal, where you pull away from relationships that drain you, that do not nourish your soul, or that keep you locked in patterns of codependency and self-sacrifice. This retreat is not a sign of weakness or avoidance. It is an act of strength. It is the strength to say, I need to pause. I need to turn inward. I need to reconnect with myself before I can fully show up for others. It is a conscious decision to protect your own inner space, to honor the sanctity of your own soul, and to refuse to be consumed by the demands of the external world. It is a reclaiming of your own agency, your own autonomy. Individuation often requires a dismantling of the structures that have defined you, your roles as a partner, a parent, a friend, a worker, a caretaker. These roles, while important, can become limiting when they define you too rigidly. They can trap you in patterns of behavior that are not reflective of your true nature, but are simply responses to the needs and expectations of others. To individuate is to strip away these external layers and discover who you are when you are no longer playing a role, when you are no longer trying to fit into someone else's narrative. This process is often marked by periods of uncertainty, confusion, and discomfort. As you begin to withdraw from the external world and confront the deeper layers of your psyche, you may experience a sense of disorientation. You may feel lost, unsure of who you are or what you want. You may question your choices, your relationships, and your purpose. But this disorientation is not a sign that you are failing. It is a sign that you are in the process of transformation. You are breaking free from old patterns, old identities, and old stories that no longer serve you. You are in the crucible of change, where the old is being burned away to make space for the new. To individuate is also to integrate the shadow, the hidden, repressed parts of yourself that you have long ignored or denied. These parts may include your anger, your fear, your desires, your vulnerabilities, and your insecurities. They are the aspects of yourself that you may have been taught to hide, to repress, or to suppress in order to fit in or to meet societal expectations. But the shadow is not something to fear. It is a part of you that has been waiting to be acknowledged, accepted, and integrated into the whole of your being. Individuation requires you to embrace the shadow, to welcome these parts of yourself back into the fold of your consciousness. It requires you to let go of the need for perfection and to accept that you are a whole person, not defined by your strengths or your weaknesses, but by the entirety of your being. It requires you to acknowledge that you are both light and dark, both beautiful and flawed, both strong and vulnerable. This process of individuation can be deeply painful, as it requires the dismantling of old identities and the confrontation of old wounds. But it is also deeply liberating. As you strip away the layers of false identities and self-limiting beliefs, you begin to reconnect with the deepest parts of yourself, the parts that are connected to your true essence, your soul's calling, your authentic desires. It is here, in the depths of withdrawal and introspection, that the seeds of transformation are planted. It is here, in the space you create for yourself, that you can begin to hear your own inner voice. And it is here, in the quiet, sacred space of individuation, that you begin to remember who you are, why you are here, and what you are meant to become.